Welcome to the Dev Launch Podcast, bringing you insights from industry experts on how to grow the digital agency you love. In this episode, we dive deep into the legal challenges that digital agencies face with Josh Barrett, a lawyer who's anything but your typical suit and tie attorney. From tackling scope creep to setting clear client boundaries, Josh shares his expertise on how to craft contracts that protect your agency while keeping relationships strong. If you're looking to solidify your agency's legal footing, this episode is packed with actionable insights you will not want to miss. Josh, thank you so much for hopping on the show. I had to tell you, you do not strike me as the typical lawyer. So that's why I'm really excited to have you on as a guest
In
on my
what
show.
way? What do you mean by that? Is that a
I
good
feel
thing?
like
I don't know.
in a good way, the
Okay.
vibes are
hmm
positive vibes.
hmm
It's almost like you work with creatives on a regular basis.
That's right. Yeah. No, I'm picking up the vibes of my client. I probably do have a dark suit and tie like somewhere in my closet if that whole thing would play well, but I haven't needed that in a long time and I like that.
That's good. I mean, all somebody needs to do is just go out to the Matchstick Legal website and see, oh, this is a different type of legal counsel. Because like the fact that you guys don't just always ever do hourly pricing for everything, you guys have like a service menu, and for the most part, kind of fixed pricing, right?
Yeah, we do a lot of fixed fee stuff and some subscription stuff, some hourly stuff. One of the biggest complaints, and not just in our industry, but like that people have about lawyers is the lack of transparency about pricing, that the clock is just running and I don't know if I call them, is it 5 minutes, is it an hour? And people getting surprise bills. And so we've worked to really try and change that. And when you don't have surprises in your bills, people tend to pay your bills. So like it works both ways. Everybody is pleased about that. But putting the menu and the pricing tool on our website has been really helpful. People like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like it. And for people listening, I mean, Josh isn't billing me hourly for this right now. No, I was kidding.
The invoice is coming. No.
It's coming. It's coming soon enough. It's coming soon enough. But anyway, Josh, I appreciate that. I appreciate having you on and hearing your perspective as a lawyer. It's not very often that I meet people who specialize, specifically lawyers specializing in this space. So it's good to get your perspective on a couple of things. But maybe before we hop into some of the nitty gritties that I wanted to talk about,
Okay.
would love to just hear a little bit about Matchstick Legal. Like, what is your ideal type of client that you're working with?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I would say 95 or so percent of our revenue and work is for creative agencies of one type or another. And sometimes they're specific, maybe they're just designers, or maybe they're just developers, or maybe they're full service creative, marketing, video production, whatever. They're also, one or two person shops and agencies with 100 employees in some instances. But I would say that the people that we add a lot of value to, like they have between 5 or 10 employees and up to 50. They're growing and they have multiple disciplines that they work in, design and development. There's a lot of different intellectual property and business things going on there, and that's where we help. And I think it's worth mentioning, like all we do is business law. Like we don't do litigation, we don't do divorces, we don't do criminal. I tell people if I'm standing next to you in court, it means we both got caught doing something, and so it's not good for either of us. But just the business work, and so we're pretty narrow, but we're really deep on agencies. And so, whereas lots of business lawyers will touch these types of things every once in a while, bread. It's our bread and butter.
Yeah, and if there isn't a better example of why niching is so
Right.
important,
Yeah.
here it is right here.
Yeah.
You definitely stand out amongst a sea of other legal counsel. So one thing, to maybe to kick off as we dive into some of the more maybe technical questions here is, why is it that so often agency contracts often come out with a ton of legalese and it's like really difficult to read? Why is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's an idea that well, we all have our experience in seeing legal contracts from maybe buying a house or when we're working as a freelancer, and they're written this way, and they're written this way because lawyers generally tend to copy and paste the last one, which was written that way and was written that way before. Um, and but when you take a step back, it's really not necessary. Some people feel like, gosh, I want my legal bang for my buck. I want it to be as complicated and difficult as possible. That means I'm really getting in there. But we have found that that approach doesn't really help the overall business relationship or getting the engagement done. So we think those agreements should be written in standard English, right? Keep them as simple as possible. It's still an important business relationship. It doesn't mean it's chatty, um, but I think that a lot of that is born out of just the copy and paste writing that most people do, and when an agency gets a draft of a contract from their lawyer, because it's a specialty area, the law, we don't, as individuals, we may not feel empowered to like, well, I don't really like that clause. Or, this seems really legalistic. It feels like you can't touch it. And, we really work hard to demystify some of that stuff and make it understandable. So you can speak plainly, make your points understood, and you have a perfectly enforceable contract without all the legalese.
Hmm. So I mean,
Yeah.
like, why is that clarity so crucial in these situations? Like, I mean, this is just me being ignorant in this space, but part of me is just like I'd almost rather err on the side of maybe being overly wordy so that I can just cover all my bases. Like, why would you say clarity is so crucial here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's this tendency to, we call it kitchen sink drafting, when people throw in every possible clause that they can think of, whether or not they might apply to their situation, or even if there's a 1%, every 1 in 100 engagements might come up against this. And that certainly is an approach, but it has a cost associated with that. Every time you put that contract in front of somebody, the other side, that you want to have understanding, you want them to agree to it, you want to use this as a way to navigate problems. If it's really long and complicated and sometimes scary, you're not going to achieve those benefits. We find that taking a more balanced approach with standard English is beneficial because it gets done faster, it increases trust. If it gets done faster, that means you get the deposit. You can start working on doing paying work. Like, nobody gets paid to negotiate contracts. You want to get that signed so you can get the deposit. Um, Increasing trust and understanding, make sure that when you have bumps over the course of a 6-month development project, that they're more likely to be worked out instead of people getting defensive behind their contract, because you have understanding about, here's how we're going to navigate problems. And you have a higher trust level to start with, that people tend to communicate instead of feel like they can't communicate. So those are all reasons we think that it's important to have a more balanced approach. Like, when I draft something for an agency, I say it's sort of, I pitch down the middle. I probably, I put a little English on it a little spin on it that favors the agency, but ultimately, holding out for some 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 clause, like, you are putting friction between you and that deposit, and you have to make choices about whether that extra stuff provide, like, it's a cost benefit. Does the extra cost and headache of negotiating this clause that's never used provide benefit? Where else in our life do we do well, maybe, just maybe, like, business is about taking risk. You're not going to, even with a 5-page or a 50-page or a 500-page contract, you're not going to eliminate all risk. So it's about striking a better balance and helping clients understand which things to choose about. And, not every client has the same risk tolerance. Some people are willing to take more risks, and we can draft for that. And some people are very conservative, and we can draft for that, and that's okay, right? Just so long as you're making choices and you're not just because it got dumped in there or you saw it in some other contract that you need to adopt everything in the kitchen sink.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine as you're sharing this, there's probably like some examples or some times that have come up in your mind where you've seen time and again, there's a certain part of the contract that typically ends up being riddled with legalese or just like maybe over bloated. What are some of those like major areas that you are looking out for in a contract?
Yeah. Um, in agency work and creative work, the indemnification clause is, first of all, most people don't know or understand what indemnification is. To the name that's on the tin and all the language that's in that clause, it's the worst of the worst in terms of being really heavy. And sometimes when an agency sees an indemnification clause, their immediate response is, well, if I have to indemnify you, then you should indemnify me. And at least we both have the same thing. But even if the clauses are mirrors, because the parties have different risks, it's not the same thing. That's a bad trade to make. It would be better to accept, certain language in the client's indemnification clause in exchange for getting a bigger deposit. That's a way better deal for most agencies.
Oh,
But
interesting.
that's a that's an example of, to your question, of something that's really laden with legalese and is difficult to navigate. And that's where we kind of act as translators sometime, either to draft it more simply or to translate something so the agency can make an informed risk decision. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with that. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'll accept that risk if I get a bigger deposit in exchange.
That's I'd never thought about that, and I know we're going to get into this in a little bit. Is using the contract, constructing the contract also as a part of your negotiation, which I think
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes we miss out on. So I know we're going to get into that in a minute, but I do want to ask a question. I didn't necessarily prep you for this one, but it was just going through my head. Being a CPA, I know a little bit about business law because we have to in order to
That's all
be
right. Yeah.
licensed CPAs. So one of the things that I know is that in the United States, each state, God bless them, each
Yeah.
state has their own rules and each state has
Right.
their own ways of doing things. So like I imagine working with creative agencies, you're not just working with creative agencies in one state, you're working with creative agencies in multiple states. When it comes to drafting some of these contracts, for the most part, do they all abide by very similar rules, or do you have a couple like wild outliers that make it so that you have to do a lot of extra kind of crafting in the contract?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So, if you were doing a contract to buy real estate or something, I would say you need a lawyer that practices in that state or in that county where you're buying the real estate because it's such local knowledge. The the reality is that selling services for money, which is what creative agencies do, or intellectual property for money, um, is pretty universally consistent. I have not encountered any significant variations among the states that require significant departures in how we draft contracts. Um, I mean, most of the differences are in, like, if you got into litigation and how the rules and procedure and discovery might go. But just in terms of, I'm going to sell you services for money. Here's the payment terms. Here's the deliverables. Here's what the specifications are. It really doesn't matter. So we have clients all over the country. We have some clients in Canada, in the UK, and Australia, and we have to. Those are all common law countries, but the general approach of selling services for money is pretty universally consistent among common law countries, and even those countries abroad, I should say, they have their we're dealing with their clients that are located in the United States. Um, but yeah, it's a lower, it's less of a concern for sure.
Hmm. That's actually really helpful to hear. You brought this up earlier, and I want to dive into this a little bit more, which is having to deal with drafting contracts as part of the negotiation. But before we even get into the contract stage, what are some things that agencies can be doing better to better position themselves for the negotiations?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that, before you have a contract in front of you, usually there's some pitches or some emails, some back and forth, some proposals. And I think there's some things that can be done there to really put yourself in a better position. So, for example, I was just talking to a client earlier today about when they send out their proposed price, right? They haven't done discovery, they haven't done much digging. It's just like, this is a ballpark, is to say this pricing assumes that we'll be using our terms, our contract. And if you make changes to our contract, or if you require your contract instead, that might affect the price. So, for example, you here's our price if you pay me in full upfront, and it's a higher price if you want to pay me over time. That type of approach, tying a price or a ballpark price to some concept of terms, is a way to use anchoring, which is a common pricing strategy. Negotiation is a way to use anchoring in your favor. So when you get into the actual contract negotiation and they say, well, we want to pay you net 60 or net 90, you can say, well, the price we quoted you, the $100,000 price we quoted you, was assuming payment in full in advance. Our price for net 60 is $125,000, right? So that the expression I like to use is to think about contract negotiation not as a series of compromises, but as a series of trades. Like, oh, you can have your 60-day terms, you just have to give me something in exchange. The same way I would say, you want more deliverables, that costs more money. You want more days to pay, that costs more money too. You can do it in all the types of things. So setting the table for that conversation in the proposal stage to let them know it's tied to terms is a thing that you can do in advance to make that, when you ask for more money later, that it goes over better.
And this sounds like a silly question to ask, but practically, what does it look like, or what does it sound like to be anchoring the exactly what you just said, where you're anchoring that in order for this price to be accepted, it needs to be by my terms. Like, how do you practically do that?
I've seen it done with as simple as what I just described, a statement that says, this price assumes that you're going to use our contract. And here's our contract attached. Like, it's still early. We're not asking you to mark it up, but I'm just letting you know it assumes these terms. Or to call out some key terms. This pricing assumes payment in full at kickoff, or two installments of $50,000 here and here. If you require changes to that, more time to pay, whatever, then we may need to adjust our pricing. Portfolio clauses is a good one. This fee assumes that we will have portfolio rights to put it on our website, submissions for awards and recognition. If you don't allow us to have those portfolio rights, the price is 20% higher. Portfolio rights are extremely valuable to an agency, and the price for work when you get portfolio rights should be lower than the price for work when you don't get. Like, you need compensation if you don't get those portfolio rights. So those are some examples of things you could do at the beginning to sort of set the stage. People, if you didn't do those things and you said, oh, you need 90 days to pay, well, our price is higher. That's a harder conversation to have than to do the anchoring at the beginning. People aren't surprised and will react to it differently. Then it's them choosing from among your menu as opposed to you moving the goalposts.
Yeah,
You
right.
being the agency. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's again, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it is important, right? Like, that you are doing that anchoring ahead of time, because, like you said, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to be perceived by your prospect or your client as being moving the goalposts. I mean, what a great way to lose trust in that experience.
Right. And I think that, you know, most agencies are already doing it already because they say, well, you want these 5 deliverables, it's this price. You want these 7 deliverables, it's more. And if you want these 10 deliverables, it's more. So you can adjust your price for legal terms in the same way you adjust it for deliverables. And I think that's the piece. We always feel like the legal terms is zero sum. That's how most people approach negotiation. And I'm saying that no, just like deliverables, you want more legal terms or more days to pay or whatever the client wants, a scary indemnification clause, you can have it, just costs more money. Make the client put their money where their mouth is, I guess.
Exactly. Literally. I mean,
Yeah.
it's brilliant. And this is just another example of where, what you guys are doing at Matchstick Legal is that you guys are, because you have such deep knowledge about this industry, this specific space, it's easier to have those types of conversations to identify, like, yeah, we can be using this as a lever to pull to extract greater value from the engagement. Is, we're not, like you said, it's not a zero sum game to be coming in and negotiating on contract terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's,
No, I think
that's
that's right.
that's really good. So it's sounding like, from what you're saying, it sounds like practically the ways that digital agency owners can be setting up these contracts for success, in terms of like the negotiations for the specifics in the contract, is to be having those conversations on the front end. And it sounds like specifically that could look like incorporating some verbiage in the proposals that you're putting together, and maybe even in some of your pricing matrices, where right now people might just be using their pricing matrices to talk about different service deliverables. You might say it could be helpful to incorporate some verbiage to say, and contract terms as we have them stated.
That's right. That's right. And we for different agencies, it might be different thing. It might be portfolio rights might be really important for some. Um, maybe indemnification or liability or payment terms can be those. Like um, we can help. We've helped other clients develop a grid. So when they're sending out their proposal, and so they have um, a meaningful way to think about it. So they're not just making it up each time. In the same way, we know building a 5-page website costs X. We know that if we don't get portfolio rights, that we have to charge a $10,000 premium or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they can just decide those things in advance, and it's easier to roll them out. And so that's a pre contract tactic that you can engage in to help extract more value. And then, when you're in the middle of it, it's more about communication. I think the mistake I see lots of agencies make is not being proactive in dealing with client problems, or mistakenly having the mentality of the um, confusing client service. Like if a client asks for something, we have to do it for free, and we have to do it immediately, and we have to rush around, and that's just not the case. Like um, it's sort of like having kids. If a client asks for something, or if you want to give options to your kids for dinner, you don't ask them what they want. You say, do you want chicken or do you want vegetables? You don't have a choice of something else, birthday cake. Same way of managing clients during the project. It's like, yes, we can do that extra work for you. Do you want us to charge you hourly for it, or do you want us to quote you a fixed fee for that addition to scope? So that's that type of proactive communication and framing is a good way to make sure you get paid for every little bit of work that you do.
Well, we talked about before ways that agency owners can sometimes have too much verbiage in a contract. What are some key elements that agencies often miss in their contracts?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the things that I see missing most often are, I like to see a clause that makes very absolutely clear that if the client is late on a payment, that the agency can stop working. That this is a way to prevent a small problem from becoming a giant problem. And some agencies feel like, gosh, I have to keep working to stay in their good graces. If I stop working, I won't get paid, but like you're just putting more money at risk. So better to manage that when you get the first indication of a payment problem. So that's one. The other one I think is really common is, most of a contract is defining an agency's like, I'm going to build all this stuff. I'm going to make all this stuff for you. Here's the schedule. Here's the deliverables. But is having a clause that describes what the client's obligations are to cooperate, provide deliverables, provide access, be responsive, be professional. And the reason for those being very clear about those obligations is that if the client doesn't do those things, then that should give the agency grounds under the contract to stop work or terminate or take other actions, right? You quote a price of $100,000 for a website, and that price is assuming everything goes smoothly, people communicate well, that everybody's gonna work diligently to getting this project done in the next couple months. If you knew in advance that the client was gonna go dark on you for 3 months, you would have quoted a higher price, or you would have not taken the project at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so defining those obligations for the client to be responsive, to work the project to, to completion within this time frame, is a way to give the agency some power when the client starts to go off the rails a little bit and starts misbehaving and says, "Oh, we have to back burner this for." Clients don't have the right just to unilaterally back burner a project, but they do it all the time. And defining some of those obligations is a way to give the agency power on how to deal with it.
Especially when the bulk of your work is so creative and requires a degree of input and collaboration with your
Yeah,
client. I think that makes a ton of sense.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, creative work is iterative. It requires input, and if if a key stakeholder goes on vacation that's not planned in the schedule or the budget, or they back burner it, or they have other priorities, or like, clients are running businesses and sometimes things happen in the business and they can't pursue the website project diligently to completion. I get that. But if they back burner it, there should be a consequence. Maybe they have to pay a restart fee. Maybe the project is just ended and when they want to restart, they can do a new SOW, and there's consequences for those things. So agencies aren't managing these zombie projects while the client is doing who knows what.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to think about is, maybe like a devil's advocate position to this, to be able to maybe ask this of you to see if you can kind of give some thought to or some response to is the what I would say the crowd who is a little bit more, shall we say, budget conscious, right? These are the people who are, I'm just going to try to do this on my own. I'm not necessarily going to want to work with somebody like Matchstick Legal. And so in their minds, they're like, you know, who cares if it's in the contract? Like, I can still enforce this, or I can still like try to execute this without the contract. I mean, what would you say to somebody who takes a position like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, contracts are a backstop, right? That if the contract says you have to pay every 2 weeks, but in the middle of the project, the parties agree that they're going to pay every 4 weeks, like, you don't need, like, you can make that agreement, and it'll be fine. I think the the problem that we see with some DIY approaches is, um, thinking that we'll just figure it all out as we go. And it's certainly possible. I'm not going to say it's not. That, the best contract is one you negotiate and sign, you put on the shelf, and you never need it, right? That doesn't mean it's not valuable. You gained a lot of benefits and you covered a lot of things by negotiating and talking about things in advance. And I think that's where some value is can be generated purposely for an agency if they're doing some of those things rather in advance rather than figuring them out as they
Mm-hmm.
go. We just talking about things in advance. One, you have sales opportunities. You can navigate potential problems in advance. You can expectations, clarifying expectations, talking about those client obligations that we just mentioned. Like, sometimes just talking about it before you start is a way to make sure it happens. And if you don't talk about it, maybe they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Clients don't know how to be good clients. So so it's not to say that person can't roll their own, but that's where we think that there's a lot of value in having some, like a same way you have a procedure for doing other things in your business, like you can have a procedure for how you're going to make proposals, negotiate contracts, manage clients during the project, and collect invoices. Like that, those are all I try and talk to people like, we don't think about just your contract, think about your contract process, right? From first phone call, first website inquiry, all the way to the last invoice being collected. What are the things that you can do to get those invoices paid sooner? Like getting an invoice paid sooner is like, that's, you shorten your days outstanding, like your receivable days, all those types of things. It's good for your financial statements. When you have that money, then you can go do something else. You can hire somebody, you can build something, you can mitigate your risk just by having money in the bank, right? When COVID struck, we saw the agencies, we saw a number of them that when it struck, which was a big deal, just get knocked over. It was a knockout punch. But those that kind of were set up and sort of had cash in the bank, obviously, which is a disciplined practice that comes from the work that you do, right? They were able to survive that first blow and get through to dealing with PPP or whatever. And so that's a very dramatic example, but it applies to other aspects of businesses as well as creative agencies. I think having some practice about how they do contracts is just as important as financial statements and tax returns and operations and culture and those types of things. But it's not the way most legal stuff is talked about in terms of process and procedure. It's more like, I just need this contract, as opposed to a negotiating strategy or a proposal strategy.
Yeah, it's a more holistic approach, is what you are referring to here. And like you say, like, of course, it's a backstop. Like, it is going to be there in the event that there is litigation that needs to take place. Although you are probably better than anybody to be able to speak to this, but probably very, very, very few cases actually go to litigation. But it's still a nice backdrop. It sounds like the vast majority of the value you get in the contract might not even be the contract itself as much as it is the process by which you're having conversations with your prospects and clients to set expectations and to align on priorities.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other part is every project's going to have some bumps, like a slow pay, a client not cooperating. And as people, this is a universal, like, it's hard to tell clients no. It's hard to talk about money. Like, these are true in our relationships with our spouses and our friends and our family. And it's true with clients, and to set expectations and to set boundaries, right? Setting boundaries in life is really hard. And with clients, it's really hard. But that's what makes us feel like, oh, I got to do that work for free, and, scope creep. And by having some diligence and thoughtfulness and understanding of what your contract says, it will empower you and the people on the agency's team when bumps come up to speak from a position of strength and authority. And not that you're going to beat them over the head with the contract, but that you say, hey, you missed a payment. If we don't have that payment in 5 days, we're going to have to go pencils down. You remember there was something about our contract in it. You don't have to beat them up about it, but we'll go pencils down until we can get it sorted out. It's best for both of us to make sure we're on the same page, right? If you've done that work in advance, then your people, that's a conversation. That's a difficult conversation, right? To say to your client, we're going to go pencils down, but it's much easier when your contract or your SOW empowers you to do that. Or, we're going to charge this particular fee, or you're asking for this work is outside of scope. I'm happy to write up an amendment to the SOW to include that within scope, like those types of things. Having those Crucial Conversations, I think is the book. Applies equally with clients. But the nice thing is, in our relationships with our spouse, we don't have or family, we don't have a contract that says what we can and can't do. In a client relationship, we do. We just need a little empowerment in how to use it. Again, not that you're going to beat up your client with the contract, except in extreme situations, but you can just speak from, yeah, it's okay for me to ask for this. It's okay for me to go pencils down because we already talked about it. Like, I'm not doing anything crazy. We've already talked about it, and this is expected. No one will be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, man, I feel that specifically in the area, like one of the areas that we help our clients with is in what we call billing and collections. So we're helping them invoice their clients and then also follow up on unpaid invoices. And, one of our standard operating procedures as we develop them for our clients is creating a clear escalation policy, which is to say, the first 7 days you get this, next 7 days you get this. By the 21st day, typically we are quoting back to them the contract terms to say, hey, per our agreement, if you are X number of days past due, we render in a 1.5% late fee. And then also we would stop doing work. And so all these things we're quoting the contract back to them. And it's like you said, it puts you in a position, a very good position of authority to not feel like you are asking something of them that they didn't already agree to.
Right. That's great. Like, I love to hear you talking about that in terms of a process. Yeah, you should have a script. Um, hey, that invoice due date's coming up on Friday. Let me know if you need our wire instructions again. And then Friday, hey, I didn't see that in the mail today. I'm sure it'll be here Monday. And then, 5 days later, and then you're stopping work soon thereafter to prevent a small problem from becoming a big problem. Like, that's when you have the most leverage.
100%. 100%. Well, you brought something up, namely scope creep. I, I'm sure no digital agency owner can possibly relate to this, but scope creep is notorious for agencies. What would you say are some strategies and contract language that you'd recommend in order to avoid that scope creep?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know. Maybe this is a really hot take. I think all scope creep. So, scope creep, in my definition, is work that you do that you don't get paid for. If you get paid for it, it's just scope. Like, if they ask you, oh, here's a bunch of stuff I want to do, and it's outside of scope, but you negotiate a fee and you get paid for it, you adjust the schedule, like, that's just scope. It's only when you don't get paid for it or you rush around and have a fire drill, like, because you think you have to. Like, so I think scope creep is self-inflicted. That it comes from not wanting to tell a client no, or not wanting to tell a client that's outside of scope, or by doing kind of a bad or lazy job in defining what's included in scope. And to your question, what are some things that we can do to manage this? Is really clear list of what's in scope and a clear list of what's outside of scope. Sometimes the best way to define what something is to define the negative space. Here's what it isn't. Lots of our clients that build websites, we build the website, but we're not uploading content to the CMS. We are not writing the content, right? You have to say that because in the client's head, like, some boss that's not at the meeting, they just think those are the website people. They're just dealing with the website, so just have the website people do it. They're not thinking about what's inside and outside of scope. And then the third cat, so included scope, excluded scope, is the client obligations. You will deliver the content to us in this format on this date. You will provide access to these people. You will make this your license fonts and your brand and your materials available to us in these formats on these dates for inclusion. Those types of things are how you manage scope creep. So when one of those things doesn't happen, the content doesn't show up on this day, you can say, hey, well, how much time do you need? You need another 30 days? Well, we didn't budget 30 days in our fee, in our schedule. We're happy to extend it 30 days. We just need to adjust the fee a little bit accordingly because our team's just hanging out. And so we need to do that. And the client will be like, whoa, you have to adjust the fee. It was like, yeah, Like if you'd have known that it needed that extra 30 days at the beginning, you would have quoted a higher fee. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how you use requests for, we need it super fast, or we need it, we're taking a break, or whatever. That's how you turn those things into scope instead of scope creep. It's only scope creep if you do it and don't ask to get paid for it. So I'm sure that's a controversial take, that all scope creep is self-inflicted. But I think when you think about it, that just it's just work that you agree to do that's unpaid, then it sort
It's
of makes
literally,
sense.
well, that's at the end of the day, that's the rub, right? That's the thing where people feel so wronged by scope creep is, like you said, if you're getting paid for it, it's just scope, but it's
Yeah.
feeling like you're being taken advantage of. That's really the issue at hand. I love that, and I also love how you bring up the whole thing of explicitly state what this is not. I mean, like, obviously I'm not a digital agency owner. I'm fractional CFO accountant, but one of the things I include in my contract verbiage is I say we are not business management. We're not running your business for you. We are not providing attestation services, which is a big important thing to clarify. When people
Hmm.
see my name CPA, I'm not attesting to
Yeah.
the validity. I'm not doing internal controls. All these different things. I'm saying all the things that I'm not doing to clarify where the line is. And I imagine people listening to this would say, okay, but some things are just like obvious. Some things are just obviously would be out of scope. But I mean, you gave a really great example for a website developer, right? Like, and I know this from firsthand experience. I know somebody who they were in a pretty decently sized contract, but there wasn't clarity on exactly who was taking over the copy. And so, in the mind of the developer, who is a understands this space and really understands the nuance of, like, well, no, if I'm developing your website, I'm not writing the copy for the website. For the untrained individual, somebody who's not an expert in this field, it's reasonable for them to conclude or make an assumption that it would be included. And so I think the point that you made is really, really good. I really hope our listeners hear, which is to say, you have to consider the fact that people who are reading this contract and who are engaging with you may not understand the nuances of the field you're in and may need those exclusion factors so that they have real clarity on what exactly it is that you're doing.
Yeah. I think that can really help. And you're right. There are some things that are that you can be absurd about it. Like I'm building a website that I'm not building the hosting environment, but are you providing the hosting environment? Like, are you wholesaling some hosting, or do they have to get their own hosting? Like, those are fair things to ask about. Lots of businesses of certain size, they don't know how websites work, right? They don't know what goes into making a logo. Um, the other piece I think that goes along with that is, because it's difficult to tell clients no or to impose boundaries, is that you let something go. You let a late payment go. You don't say anything. I don't want to make them mad. Or what's really happening is, like, I think internally is people were afraid the client will get mad at us, or that they'll fire us, or that they'll think we're treating them unfairly. And in our experience, that's universally or almost universally not true. Like, and in the times when people say, what are what are you doing? Why are you saying this? Really, they're mad at themselves. They know that I should have paid the invoice on time. What do you mean you're
Mm-hmm.
stopping work? Well, of course we're stopping work. You didn't pay us. So I think those fears are normal human fears, but in our experience, they don't come up. And if you have a good contract, you'll be like, hey, I'm good. Like, I'm following the rules that we agreed to. Like, you might be mad or upset, but like, your agency should not be put in a fire drill because they're not following the rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but those things are hard, and I just like in conversations with your family or your spouse, like the first time you have a difficult conversation, it's hard. The third time, it's a little easier, and by the 10th time, like, you're talking about tough stuff really easily, and you're comfortable with what your contract says, you're comfortable saying no, you're used to the types of responses that you get and how you're going to respond to those things. So all those things come together in how you can manage that nasty old scope creep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's better to have those tough conversations earlier. It's like you said, you don't want to train the client to think that it's okay to push boundaries or to cross those lines, or like reinforce that, because it just sets both of you up for failure, really, at the end of the day. I mean, you're talking a little bit here about effectively how to say no, and how to bring that up. But would you mind going a little bit deeper? Let's say, we come to this a crossroads with our client, or maybe just a prospect, where we have to essentially enforce the SOW that was signed. Like, what are some practical steps that we can say no effectively when necessary?
Yeah, I mean, like lots of saying no, um, these conversations are about reflecting. Like, I hear that you need this. Here are some solutions for dealing with this. That's a way of saying that, like the way you're suggesting is a no, but here are two healthy options I can allow you to choose from, both of which mean we get paid for it.
Mm,
Um, I mean, that's a common, like, just communication strategy of reflecting, showing someone that you hear them, and then reframing into an acceptable alternative for your business. There's um, a really good negotiation book about that, and these are common strategies if you read about negotiation, and it works. And it's just dealing with people want to feel heard, right? Even in contract negotiation, um, and then once they feel heard, they're in a better position to take alternative framing. Our brains just are more receptive to those types of things, um, in those situations. I one thing I some clients we see, they like, I don't want to get into a bunch of this stuff at the beginning when I'm negotiating the contract, or because I'm afraid it's going to end the deal and they won't sign with us and we won't get the money, and let's just quick sign, and no one's really going to look at it, and let's cross that bridge when we get there. And I think that that's taking on, like, your pricing probably doesn't reflect the extra risk that you're taking on by doing that, by plugging your nose and signing. But I think more importantly, would you rather have a difficult conversation when there's no money on the table, as opposed to when you've just sent them a $50,000 invoice and they're like, whoa, 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 wait. Like, when's the better time to have that conversation? Like,
mm,
I would submit, let's cross that bridge before there's 50 grand of your staff's time at risk. Um, so getting out in front of it and having those difficult conversations, it does get easier. I guess it's hard for me to say, like, I have those conversations for a living, but
right.
you do a few of them, and you feel all right about it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought up, though, the piece about some good negotiation tactics. And like you said, there's an element where there's mirroring happening. So you're starting off just making sure that they know that you heard them. So I think one of the best ways I've heard this, I don't know if I read this in a book, but definitely heard it, is you want to to say it in a way where it's clear to them that you see things the way that they see things. And then once you get that confirmation, then you can talk, like you said, you can talk about those different options. So what I'm hearing you say, if I can do my own mirroring here for a minute,
Yeah,
what I'm hearing you say is, that it's not as much about getting to a no, or like trying to put those walls and that boundary up. It's a lot more about first getting to the spot where that you've conveyed to them that you're hearing them and you understand what it is they're asking for, and make sure you guys are on the same page there. And then it's talking about, here are the two paths forward, here are the three paths forward, whatever the options are, and then leaving it up to them to decide what's the best course of action that they want. So it's not about you just shooting down an idea, it's about giving them options and letting them choose what's going to work best.
yeah, yeah, and that feels empowering, to have choices, right? One of the things I did for a client recently is I had a client get with their team that dealt with, the project managers, account managers, and sort of, here are the 10 problems that come up, being late, payments slow, non-responsive. And we went through and we sort of built scripts like, how are we going to respond to these types of things? Like, what's the friendly conversation? How do we escalate? Like you talked about the payment escalation procedure. How do we deal with an invoice is going to be due on Friday to an invoice is 14 days past due? What are we doing in those steps along the way? And explaining how the contract supports those things again, so that the account manager, the project manager can speak from a position of strength and confidence. Again, not beating them up with the contract on day one, but just knowing that the choices that they give, the way they, hey, we can do that. Do you need more time to make this decision? That's totally okay. That's going to change to the schedule. Our team's going to be idle, different fee or whatever. That's how you can give empowering choices, but you're authorized to do that because of what the contract says.
Yeah, it does come back to the contract. Yeah, it might not be, it might not be used actually in law, in a court of law, but it will
Yeah.
certainly be used as a tool to help drive the right types of conversations you need to have working with your client. Well, Josh, I know we're up the top of the hour. I really
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
this time to talk. I've learned a lot. This has been
No, this
very
is cool. And I like hearing, like, from the CFO perspective, that you are giving some of the same advice and practice. I mean, good business practice, like, sort of works in all these areas, works in the HR areas as well. And so I'm glad that we're singing the same tune, if you will. So I think that speaks very well, for all of us in helping our agency clients do better.
and that's what it's all about, isn't it,
That's
Josh?
right.
We want to see these people soar. I tell people
We're doing
I
it.
want to help. I tell people I want to help you build a business that you love without going bankrupt in the process.
That sounds good. I like that.
So, well, Josh, I'm going to imagine people are going to listen to this and they'll be like, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or they might have some questions, some follow-up questions that they want to reach out to you. What's the best way to
Sure.
get in contact with you or even follow you in the journey at Matchstick Legal?
Yeah, well, we're at matchstick.legal, and there's 3 lawyers here, myself, Gabe, Jen. You can contact us that way. We do a bunch of stuff on the LinkedIn. There's a newsletter with email articles that people say are really good about how to negotiate and draft contracts. And so that's a good way to look us up. And if somebody ever, like agencies, like we do an initial consult, probably like you do, for no charge, and just figure out what the heck is going on, where their pain points are, what they need to fix, what they don't need to fix. So those are all different ways that we can help someone get on the right path.
I love it. Awesome. Well, I would highly encourage listeners to reach out to Josh. He is wonderful to talk with, as
Thanks,
you have
Tony.
seen in this conversation today. Josh, maybe we'll have to have episode number 2 with you, part 2, to talk even further, as I have additional legal questions that come up.
That would be great. I can
but
go on, as you probably gathered. I can go on about this stuff. I've got a lot to say about scope creep. So,
if I didn't know any better, I'd almost say you were in the right field because you're passionate about this stuff. So it's good
that's
stuff.
right.
Well, Josh, I really do appreciate you taking the time today.
You bet. Take care, Tony.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value in our episode today, please leave us a review and tell your friends about us. If you're interested in being a guest on our show, as a digital agency owner, or maybe somebody with insights that can help digital agencies grow, head over to our website to learn more at acquip.com/podcast guest. That's acquip.com/podcast guest.